This next story comes from Marcus, a 29-year-old software engineer who discovered that his quiet suburban street harbored a dark secret that went far beyond typical HOA politics. Marcus and his wife had just purchased their first home in an upscale suburban development in Colorado. The neighborhood was pristine, every lawn perfectly maintained, every house painted in approved colors, and a homeowners association that seemed to take their job very seriously. The HOA president, a man named Robert Chen, introduced himself within hours of Marcus moving in. Robert was polite but stern, handing Marcus a thick binder of community rules and regulations. Some seemed excessive: specific hours for lawn mowing, approved plant species, and even regulations about window treatments visible from the street. Marcus initially brushed off the strict rules as typical suburban nonsense, but compliance wasn't optional in this neighborhood. The first violation notice arrived within a week. His garbage cans were allegedly visible from the notices kept coming. His doormat was the wrong color. His car was parked 6 inches too close to the curb. A package left on his porch for 2 hours constituted visual clutter. Each violation came with increasing fines, and Marcus noticed things escalated when Marcus received a notice for unapproved nighttime activity. According to the complaint, lights in his home office were visible past 11 p.m., which violated the community's peaceful hours policy. Marcus had been working late on a project, but the idea that the HOA was monitoring his indoor lighting felt invasive and creepy. That's when Marcus started paying attention to the patterns. The same three families seemed to file all the complaints. These families also happened to be the ones whose houses always passed inspection. Despite obvious violations Marcus could see from the street, the truth began unraveling when Marcus's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, quietly approached him one evening. She'd lived in the neighborhood for 15 years and had watched it transform under Robert's leadership. She told Marcus that families who didn't comply with Robert's unwritten rules found their lives systematically destroyed through harassment, financial ruin from endless fines, and social isolation. Mrs. Patterson revealed that Robert and his inner circle had been forcing families to sell their homes at below market prices to buyers within their network. It was a sophisticated gentrification scheme disguised as community standards. Families who couldn't afford the constant fines or couldn't tolerate the harassment would sell cheap and leave. Marcus decided to investigate further and discovered public records showing a pattern of property transfers within the community. Over 5 years, nearly 30 families had sold their homes at significant losses to buyers connected to Robert's business network. The psychological pressure tactics were ruthless. Security cameras monitored every property, not for safety, but for violation documentation. Community meetings became public shaming sessions for non-compliant residents. Children of targeted families were excluded from neighborhood activities and birthday parties. When Marcus tried to organize resistance among other homeowners, he discovered how deep the manipulation ran. Several neighbors he thought he could trust reported his conversations back to Robert. The isolation was intentional and effective. The situation reached a climax when Marcus received a notice claiming his wife's garden gnomes violated the aesthetic harmony standards. The fine was $500 per day until removal. That same week, their car tires were slashed, and someone threw eggs at their house during the night. Marcus finally contacted an investigative journalist who specialized in HOA corruption. The resulting news story exposed the scheme and led to criminal charges against Robert for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. The investigation revealed similar operations in three other developments Robert had managed. Marcus and his wife ultimately moved, but not before helping several other families document their experiences for ongoing lawsuits. The neighborhood's property values plummeted when the story broke, ironically achieving the opposite of what Robert claimed to protect. The experience taught Marcus that suburban communities can become insular cults where power hungry individuals use social pressure and legal technicalities to destroy lives. The American dream of home ownership became a nightmare when the wrong people gained control of the system.
Sarah, a 34-year-old mother of two from Ohio, who learned that the most dangerous predators often hide behind the most charming facades. Sarah had just moved into her dream home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and neighbors who waved from their porches. It seemed like paradise. Her next-door neighbor, David, was particularly welcoming. He was in his early 50s, well-dressed, and always ready with a helpful hand or friendly conversation. David worked from home as a consultant and seemed to know everyone's schedule. He'd offered to collect packages when Sarah was at work, helped her carry groceries, and even volunteered to watch her kids play in the backyard when she needed to run quick errands. Sarah felt incredibly lucky to have such a considerate neighbor, but things started feeling off after about 3 months. Sarah began noticing that David always seemed to know when she was home alone. He'd appear at her door with coffee or fresh-baked cookies whenever her husband was traveling for work. At first, she thought it was just coincidence, but the timing was too perfect. Then came the night that changed everything. Sarah woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom and noticed a light in her backyard. Looking out her bedroom window, she saw David standing in his yard, but he wasn't looking at his own house. He was staring directly at her bedroom window with a pair of binoculars. Sarah's blood ran cold. She quietly woke her husband and pointed toward the window. David was still there, motionless, watching their house. They called the police immediately, but by the time officers arrived, David had gone inside. The next morning, Sarah decided to confront David about what she'd seen. His response chilled her to the bone. He smiled that same friendly smile and said, "Oh, that wasn't me. You must have been dreaming." But Sarah knew what she'd seen. Over the following weeks, Sarah started paying closer attention to David's behavior. She noticed he had a clear view of her children's bedroom windows from his second floor. She saw him standing at those windows frequently, always with binoculars or a camera with a long lens. The breaking point came when Sarah's 8-year-old daughter mentioned that Mr. David had been asking her questions about her bedtime routine and whether she slept with her curtains open or closed. That's when Sarah realized the scope of what was happening. Sarah and her husband installed security cameras and discovered the horrifying truth. David had been entering their property nightly for months. The footage showed him walking around their house, peering into windows, and even trying door handles. Most disturbing was the footage of him standing outside her children's bedroom windows for extended periods. When police searched David's house, they found thousands of photos taken through the family's windows over several months. Photos of Sarah changing clothes, her children sleeping, and detailed notes about the family's daily routines. They also discovered similar surveillance materials for other families in the neighborhood. David was arrested and charged with stalking, criminal trespassing, and possession of child exploitation material. During his trial, it was revealed that he had been evicted from his previous neighborhood for similar behavior. Sarah's family moved within 2 months, but the psychological damage was done. Her children still have nightmares, and Sarah checks every lock multiple times each night. She learned that suburban safety is often just an illusion, and the most dangerous people are sometimes those who work hardest to appear trustworthy. Our final story comes from Michael, a police detective who moved to a quiet suburb seeking peace from his high-stress career, only to discover that his new neighborhood's crime prevention group was hiding a deadly secret. Michael had spent 15 years working homicide in Chicago and was burned out from constant exposure to violence and human cruelty. When he retired at 45, he and his wife moved to a pristine suburb in Wisconsin that seemed like the perfect place to decompress and enjoy a peaceful retirement. The neighborhood had an active community watch program led by a retired military officer named Colonel James Harrison. Harrison ran the program with military precision, regular patrols, detailed incident reports, and excellent communication with local law enforcement. Crime statistics for the area were remarkably low, and residents credited the neighborhood watch with maintaining their safe environment. Michael was initially reluctant to join, wanting to leave law enforcement behind, but Harrison was persistent. He argued that Michael's professional experience would be valuable to the group, and several neighbors encouraged him to participate. Eventually, Michael agreed to attend a few meetings. The neighborhood watch meetings were more formal than Michael expected. Harrison maintained detailed files on every resident, including work schedules, family compositions, and behavioral patterns. He claimed this information was necessary for effective security monitoring, but the level of surveillance seemed excessive for a suburban volunteer group. Michael's detective instincts were triggered when Harrison mentioned several incidents that had been resolved internally without police involvement. These included suspected burglary attempts, domestic disputes, and teenage vandalism that Harrison's team had handled appropriately to avoid burdening law enforcement. The first major red flag came when Harrison asked Michael to help investigate a new resident named David Kim, a software engineer who worked irregular hours and had visitors at unusual times. Harrison suspected Kim might be dealing drugs, but when Michael asked to see evidence, Harrison became evasive and said the investigation was still developing. Michael decided to conduct his own discreet inquiry into Kim's activities. He quickly determined that Kim was simply a freelancer who worked with international clients. Explaining his irregular schedule and diverse visitors, there was absolutely no evidence of criminal activity. When Michael reported his findings to Harrison, the colonel's reaction was disturbing. Harrison insisted that Kim was definitely suspicious and suggested they needed to take action to protect the community. He implied that waiting for concrete evidence was a luxury they couldn't afford. Michael began paying closer attention to the neighborhood watch's activities and noticed troubling patterns. The group seemed to target residents who didn't conform to unstated community standards: single men, families of different ethnicities, and anyone whose lifestyle didn't match the suburban norm. The truth began emerging when Michael investigated the neighborhood's supposedly low crime statistics. He discovered that several families had moved away suddenly after brief residencies, often selling their homes at significant losses. When Michael tracked down some of these former residents, they described campaigns of harassment, vandalism, and intimidation that forced them to leave. One family revealed that their car tires had been slashed repeatedly, their lawn had been vandalized with racist graffiti, and they had received anonymous threatening notes. When they reported these incidents to police, they were told that similar reports from their address had been deemed unfounded after investigation by the Neighborhood Watch program. Michael realized that Harrison had cultivated relationships with local law enforcement that allowed him to influence how complaints were handled. Police trusted the Neighborhood Watch's assessment of situations, creating a system where Harrison could effectively control which crimes were taken seriously. The breaking point came when Michael discovered that the Neighborhood Watch maintained a problem resident list with detailed plans for encouraging unwanted families to move. These plans included coordinated harassment campaigns, property damage designed to look random, and social isolation tactics. Most disturbing was evidence that Harrison's group had escalated beyond harassment in at least one case. A family that had refused to be intimidated into moving had experienced a house fire that investigators ruled accidental, despite suspicious circumstances. The family survived but lost everything and were forced to move. Michael gathered evidence and contacted state authorities, bypassing local law enforcement that had been compromised by Harrison's influence. The investigation revealed that similar neighborhood watch groups in 3 other communities were operating under Harrison's guidance, using identical tactics to maintain demographic control. Harrison was ultimately arrested and charged with conspiracy, hate crimes, and arson. Several other Neighborhood Watch members received lesser charges, and the investigation exposed corruption within the local police department that had enabled Harrison's activities. Michael's experience taught him that suburban communities can become authoritarian microstates when the wrong people gain institutional power. The very systems designed to protect residents can be weaponized against those who don't conform to narrow definitions of acceptable community membership. The neighborhood disbanded its watch program after Harrison's arrest, but the psychological damage to residents was lasting. Michael and his wife moved again, realizing that true peace requires more than just the absence of visible crime.